So welcome today to this Canadian Sociological Association webinar. The title of our presentation today is Iranian Politics and the Unveiling of Women. I'm so excited to see you all here today. It's very encouraging to know how many people are interested in this topic, and I'm really hoping that our talk today can help us to better understand the current events that I know many of us are watching on the news. So I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. While we're meeting here virtually, it's important that we recognize the land that we're located on and the land that that this nation is on. So this nation has this incredibly bright history, but it was greatly devastated with the arrival of colonization. So as such, it's very important that we recognize what this land is called and that we continue to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to building positive relationships on the land, which is something that the CSA is very much committed to. So from coast to coast, the CSA acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, First Nations, and Métis people. The speaker, Sara, and I today, we're here in Victoria at the University of Victoria, which sits on the traditional territory of the Wissanic, Songhees, and Lekwungen First Nations. And we invite you all to learn more about the territory which you reside on, which you can do at the website on the screen here. So welcome everyone again. My name is Berard. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Victoria, and I'm also the co-chair of the Applied and Community Engaged Sociology Research Cluster with the Canadian Sociological Association. So our cluster's specific focus is really helping to connect sociologists all across Canada who are doing applied work, and that's really that kind of the sociology that's in action. And we recently added the community engaged portion to our sociological cluster in order to just continue to expand our growing network as more of us are doing work within communities. So if anyone is interested in that cluster that I just talked about there, and if it's something that you would like to join, please do reach out. You can find all of our information on the CSA website. And just a quick kind of housekeeping things here. So if you are interested in any kind of closed captioning for the talk today, it is available for accessibility under the live transcript function. And then you also can use the chat box to submit your questions. So we're going to keep the chat box just so me and Sara can see, but we'll address any questions after the initial discussion that she provides. So if you have any questions at all during, please just put them in the chat. I'll take note of them, put them in at any time, and then we can ask those at the end. And if you're having trouble finding those are all just at the bottom of the screen. If you scroll your cursor down there, you'll be able to find them. But let's get into what we're all here today for in the talk that I'm so excited for. So we're very lucky today to have Sara Naderi, who is a very good friend of mine and who I have been lucky to be learning from a lot over the past few years of knowing her. So Sara is a PhD candidate here at the University of Victoria. She's extremely close to finishing her degree, just about a month away. And she's also a sessional instructor here at UVic and a faculty member at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, which is based in Surrey, BC. So Sara's work is focused on the sociology of knowledge. She takes this critical post-colonial feminist lens, and she's been working on the past few years on her dissertation project in which she's interviewed Iranian women of the 80s generation and contextualizes their lived experiences as marginalized individuals in a post-colonial society of the modern world in Iran. So with the very tragic recent passing of the young Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, and the mass social movement that we've been seeing develop in Iran and globally, this conversation around women's rights and autonomy has really been pushed to the forefront of the media, including here in Canada. So we felt that Sara would be able to provide some insight into this topic based on her work. So her talk today won't focus just solely on the actual present movement that we're watching, but it will instead really help us to understand how history has sort of led to this current moment in time that we're all watching from this feminist perspective that she provides with this incredible deep knowledge and real thoughtful consideration. So without further ado, I will pass this on to Sara.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And yeah, thanks so much for Canadian Sociological Association for providing me with this opportunity to a little bit talk about Iran and Iranian women and share what I think about it and get the opportunity to learn from you. So what I am going to talk, my name is Sara Naderi. I think Ashley introduced me so nicely. I'm a student PhD candidate at the University of Victoria. What I am going to talk today is a little bit about the Iranian politics and the centric roles of the women in the Iranian politics, and not just centric role of the Iranian women, but how this centric role actually affects the everyday life of that women, which the recent one we saw in the tragic death of Gina or Mahsa Amini's, which triggered that the protest that we are witnessing. I think it's been the fourth week that we have had this protest all over the Iran in small and big cities, from different class of the society, from different different ethnicity and religious group, all came to the streets and chant against the all cruelty and social and injustice that the Iranian regime has had against the women and against the most citizen of the Iran actually. So Gina actually introduced that the topic. I'm pretty sure that most of you are familiar with that tragic events. Her name was actually, her Kurdish name was Gina, and this is also a matter of irony. First, in Iran, when you are a part of like ethnical minority, there is a chance that that name that you choose for your kids, which is coming from your ethnical history and like ethnical history does not accepted by the Iranian regime as a legal name to go to your first birth certificate. So her name in the birth certificate is Mahsa, but I would rather to call her Gina because that was the name that obviously she liked more, and that was the name that she was called by Islamic Republic, by her friends and by her family. So, and interestingly, Gina means life and life-giving. So that's another interesting point in the life and death of Gina, which gave birth, which her death actually gave birth to new, I think I would say, era in the Iranian society, actually new era in the Iranian movement. I hope so, that happens, actually, that's my hope. So Gina was arrested. That was the story. Gina was arrested by what we call morality police in 16th of September. I will talk about that morality police a little bit later in these discussions. Nobody knows what happened to her. What we know is that she had died under custody. There are lots of rumors about what happened. The official report is that she got a stroke, which is so rare considering her own age, but people believe that she was died as a result of torture or her head being beaten by the police. But that was actually her death, her tragic death, and under the police custody was the trigger of all movements that we have. When she was died, in her grave, her parents wrote one very, I think, interesting and important sentence, which turned true. They said, Gina, you are not dead. Your name is gonna be a symbol. And that's actually what has happened. Her name became the symbol of the new uprising in Iran. New uprising from people all over Iran with different requests, with different interests, with different ethnical and religious and even political belief, but what they all share together, and I'm gonna borrow it from Dr. Wahhabzadeh, was that they revolt for getting back their dignity. Like that is the things that all of the Iranian people, I think, lost. They shared that loss. during that recent year, at least I can say. So Iran's protest, like first it has been started with women like turning unveil themselves and burn their scarf, and then it was continued by all men and women. It started from the Kurdish province, the city that Jina belonged to, but then soon after it expanded to all Iran's. But before going further, I need to a little bit talk about what is that morality police, and that's important for our current discussions, which is about veiling of Iranian women, which triggered actually was the cause of this movement. Morality police is, or patrol, guidance patrol as we call it in Iran, is a police which has been emerged in the Iranian public sphere since 2008, and its mission was to control the behavior of women in the public sphere, to control if the veiling of the women is according to what they call Islamic moral code or not. If they thought that the veiling of women are not according to the Islamic rule, the women were arrested by the morality police, and until their family bring them some new clothes which would be appropriate in their view. So that system has been there, and there was lots of criticism against it. There was lots of social media movement from the women against it. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but that was opposed by the majority of Iranian society, and it was also, the opposition was so much that even the elites in the Islamic regime, some of them think that it is irrational and it is unnecessary to do so, and advised against it. But against all of these things, against the fact that at least I can say the a little bit more rational elites in the Islamic regime also advised against that morality police. The question is that why this veiling is so important, why Islamic Republic don't give up over it, even with the price of its own entity, why it is so important for the Iranian Islamic regime, though since 40 years ago, Islamic regime has gave up about lots of the value that they have claimed that they are going to fulfill and have in the Iranian society as Islamic society since 1979 revolution. So they gave up lots of other value and laws and codes and symbols. Why not this one? So for knowing that, we need to have a little bit of history, a little bit move back and talk about Iran 1979 revolutions, one of the biggest revolution of the late 20th century. That revolution gave end to the monarchy of Pahlavi dynasty, Mohammad Reza Shah. In Iran, we call king as Shah. So, and gave birth to what nowadays we call Islamic regime or Islamic Republic. Somebody says that it was hijacked by the Islamic leader. Somebody says it was inherited to them, different narrative. But what is obvious is that it was people against from different walk of life, different intellectual group who raised against from liberals to the leftists to the religious people who raised against the tyranny and despotic system of monarch system, which was oppressing lots of human rights and political rights of not only activists but normal people in the society. The monarch system, the last monarch system, especially Mohammad Reza Shah, wanted to make Iran a modern Iran, but modern just in the sense of imitating all economic change and having some economic development in their own interpretation, of course, because that's also a matter of controversy, but not giving the citizens of that society their actual human rights. So some sort of uneven development. That was the trigger of Islamic Republic, that people, they were citizens, they were subjects in the modern society, they wanted their human rights, but they were deprived of it. But at the end, long story short, at the end, the Islamic, the revolution was the heritage of the revolution, I would say, says by the Islamic regime. So let's see what happened for the women in the Islamic regime. So actually, in the post-revolutionary Iran, legally the women condition became worse from the beginning. Right after the revolution, the less male-biased family law in monarch regime was replaced by the new family law based on the Sharia that distinguished women's equal right in marriage, divorce, custody of their children after divorce, and etc. Veiling and women become also mandatory at that time, right after Iran revolution. But there was some other thing was going on, and it was some cultural change happening. Culturally, Islamic revolution provided women in religious and traditional family and or urban and rural royal class with the more opportunity for obtaining higher education and public participations. Why that happens? Because first and foremost, Iranian women had a very significant role in development of Iranian revolutions. The interesting point that may distinguish a little bit Iranian revolution from other one was that the religious leader of the revolution, the Ayatollah Khomeini, asked the women to come into the streets to protest against the Shah regime. And he said that they don't need the permissions of their family to do so. So, of course, his addressee was not secular liberal women who already had all those rights, but his addressee was the traditional women who, since in the Pahlavi era, because of the unveiling law, which I'm going to talk about that, and also the secular culture of the public sphere, were banned by their moral value or by their family value from coming to the public space and like playing active role, not coming, just playing active role, having a political and social agency in the public sphere. So those women started to feel that they are strong. So those women came into the street. So Iranian revolution was combination of all women, some women from lower class, some upper middle class women who were more secular, and all against the, let's say, westernized, modernized politics of modernization, politics of Pahlavi regime. So, but the point is that culturally, the beginning of the Islamic revolution, that act that women have a right to contribute equally in the public sphere with any bill or intention that it was said, because some people said that they just wanted to abuse the presence of women, of course, in any political acts, but how it was read by those women was like, yeah, I have an agency, I can come to the space, public space, and so on and so forth. What happened at the, one of the biggest fan of that Islamic regime somehow were the religious women. That was maybe one reason that when all these legal discriminations occur right after Islamic Republic, those women didn't care about it because they didn't even enjoy the benefits, the legal right benefit that they officially had during the during the monarchy era. Actually, as Patricia Higgins actually says, who is a scholar working on that issue, those legal equal law was work for the women who actually had the traditional permission of their family to come to the public sphere. So when they didn't have that, so they couldn't enjoy that law as much as secular women. So we had, right after Islamic Revolution, right after banning unveiling for women, we had the protest from women, lots of middle-class women, secular and liberal women protest against that mandatory unveiling. It was also supported by what we call nowadays Islamic feminists, the women who are coming from those Islamic elites, but they believe for veiling for themselves, but they didn't want that it would be forcefully imposed on the other women. Their voice has not been heard. The voice of those women who came into the street in 8th of March of 1979 after revolution obviously was not here because there was lots of other voice in the Iranian revolution, which was making the atmosphere and political atmosphere and the political airs of Iranian society a little bit deaf to hear the voice of women's uprising. Anyways, I'm saying that coming back to the current movement, what people said that they distinguish this current movement from the other movement in Iran happening before Islamic Revolution, after Islamic Revolution, or before Islamic Revolution, is that women were the main actor of 2020, were the main actor of the 2020 protest. I a little bit cast up of it, so I accept that in this movement, women were the first group who start to resist. Women were the first group who triggered the movement by burning their scarf, by coming to the street. We have a lots of fight, fearless fight from the women's side with the police, something that we didn't witness in other movements that much. And then other people joined them and the movement became changed soon after the movement against mandatory veiling to the movement against the entire entity of the regime. And you see that like the centric position of the women as a symbol of free Iran in the Iran's recent movement. So they are all the posters of which I collect from the internet, like social media, and show all of them. If you take a look at them, you show the centric position of women in them. So that flag with the women hair, long hair, that map of the Iran with the long women hair, women like as a symbol of changing the landmark of Iranian society, Azadi square into the women's shape. So all of these things say symbolically, at least women have a very centric position in this movement, and we can call them the leader of this movement as a group, as a gender group. So, but this centric position, when I'm observing this centric position in the big map of the history of Iranian women, it is both for me a herald of the hope, but a little bit threat as well. So hope, you all know why hope. Women are the center, so their voice is gonna be heard more. Obviously, you feel that when somebody is the face of the movement, when somebody is the center of the movement, when their movement is going to happen in the name of somebody, that person should benefit from it most. But in Iranian case, wrong. It does not happen. It does not happen necessarily. The history, at least, doesn't show us like this. So first, coming back to that assumption that say women, the distinguished feature of this movement was that women play centric role, women were active. Women have always been active in all movements in Iran. If you take a look at the history and if you hear see the history of Iranian women, not from that official androcentric, let's say nationalistic narrative of it, you see that how women has, since constitutional revolution of up to now, in practice, Iranian women have always shaped significant part of protest for human dignity, freedom, and social justice. However, this movement have always been represented and narrated by men, be modernist or Islamist. In the same formal narrative, we see that the symbolic image of women has become the symbol of the modern Iran and how it should be ruled. This centrality, exactly this centrality of this symbolic image of women have always overshadowed actual women request for justice and equal rights. So how that happened, why these two in the Iranian history show some contradiction with each other. So again, we have to a little bit move back more into the history, go back to the 1930s, the first king in the Pahlavi dynasty, Reza Shah, who is called the father of Shah, as I said, it means king, so I don't just, when I say Shah, it means king. So who was the father of modern Iran, who is called as a father of, I would call forced modern Iran, because he tried to modernize Iranian society by force. So rapid modernization without like letting the culture to change according to its natural evolution and development. That was what happened in the Reza Shah modernization plan. And actually, when we see the Iranian unveiling history, like in the media narrative, the story has started since 1979 Islamic Revolution. Again, false. History of unveiling discourse and politics in Iran has been started not from compulsory veiling, but from compulsory unveiling. So what happened was Reza Shah, in Reza Shah opinion, Iran should be modernized, right? In Reza Shah opinion, and it was not just Reza Shah opinion, it was an opinion of lots of intellectual people in Iran. The new modernist intellectual discourse in Iran emerged since constitutional revolution. Iran was backward. How can we move forward? How we can be developed? The answer was that, okay, we should be like West. What is the difference between us and West? The first answer was veiling of the women. First, veiling of the women were recognized as a symbol of Islam. First, we should leave Islamic culture if we want to be modernized. What is the symbol of Islamic culture? Veiling of women. So women should be unveiled, even by force, if we want our society to be modernized. So what happened was that exactly like the situation, maybe even worse, the situation that we witness right now, that was a morality, the guidance patrol in Iran that like arrest people when they are veiled. There was there was a police at that time got they had to like enforce unveiling on women, so pull the scarf from the head of women when they were veiled, even by force. Women who had a veiling were prohibited from entering into the university, into the restaurants, into the like major states in the public space. So if you were women, in veiled women in the Reza Shah era, it was like you didn't have any right to be in public sphere. And that was happening not in the condition, like not in the nowadays condition of Iranian society, that most of the society, most of the women are like educated, liberal, secular, and most of them want to be unveiled, or at least the high majority of Iranian society now want to be unveiled. So if that happens, so maybe there would be less resistance. But in the time that Iranian society, the veiling was the method of wearing clothes among all Iranian women, and coming outside home unveiled for Iranian women at that time, not just in the rural area, not just in the small town, but in all through the Iran, all over the Iranian country, was conceived by that woman as if she's coming out into the streets naked, right? So lots of women chose not to come into the streets in order to do not jeopardize their veil would be pulled or taken away from the police. So that's when I was saying that now we can see that how traditional religious part of the women's society during 1979 revolution, when they see that when that happened, they started to feel agency. They started to feel that they have a political sphere, because first of all, the veil was accepted, or actually the veil was promoted, most importantly because of their moral value, their family, their patriarchal family moral value, they couldn't go to the university, they couldn't go to the public sphere, because the public sphere and university was considered by the traditional part of society as secular places which threaten their moral value. And it would be good if, like, majority of Iranian society at that time were secular, but at that time it was not the case. So, and then, as you know, we have mandatory veiling. Both of them happened under the rule of the patriarchal state, which, as Zahedi says, political regime have been instrumental in assigning meaning to female hair and the veil, in constructing female image corresponding to their political ideology. They have used that image of an ideal Iranian woman to symbolize the country. In constructing this image, the modernist Pahlavi regime and the cleric regime of Islamic Republic have used legal measure and physical force to impose their political will. From one patriarchal Shah to another patriarchal leader, the condition of women was like being a symbol of political change, either toward westernization and modernization of society, or toward the Islamization of the society. So there is a binary discourse, as we always see in there. Veiling of women was recognized in that discourse as the main symbol of so-called Iranian backward culture in the modernization discourse, which was represented in early 20th century by Reza Shah, like in political system by Reza Shah, but there was lots of intellectual support over there, which should be removed, which is mandatory unveiling, in order that the society be transformed into the Western civilized culture. So mandatory unveiling of women become the symbol of modern progressive governance of Iran. Islam is fundamentalist, reverse. The reveiling of women has been recognized as a sign of society's revival, its traditional image of itself. So that's one point that we also need to refer back to the Islamic Revolution. Islamic Revolution by nature was some sort of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolution as well. So culturally, it was a revolution supported by lots of post-colonial thinkers in Iran, in trying as an attempt to retrieve what they call indigenous self, which was betrayed, which was oppressed by the domination of the colonial culture, at least colonial culture over Iranian society, which its sign again was unveiling of the women. So that was what led to, in the Islamic regime, the mandatory veiling to become promoted as the most important symbol of the Islamic anti-Western governance of Iran. And actually, that a mandatory veiling was also coming from Western media reading. First, I mean, it was not coming from, but first, it was raised by the Western media reading of the Iranian Revolution that they call Iranian Revolution of women with black chador. Chador was the traditional, very strict way of veiling for the urban Iranian women at that time, and of course, nowadays society. So, a little bit go more through it, like using the post-colonial feminist literature, basically Leila Ahmed. I use the quote from Leila Ahmed here. She said that peculiar resemblance we can find with the colonial and still commonplace Western view that an innate connection exists between the issue of culture and women in Muslim society. And the similar presumption underlying the Islamic resistance position that such a fundamental connection does indeed exist. The resemblance between the two positions is not coincidental. They are mirror image of each other. So what do I mean by the colonial Western view, and what is the role of colonialism? Okay, we need to a little bit more clarification. So that assumption of veiling as a symbol of Islam. I said Reza Shah take veiling as a symbol of Islam, but Reza Shah did not create that. That assumption of the veiling as a symbol of Islamic society for the first time was created by the Orientalist scholar who came to the Muslim society, not only Iran, and saw the veiling as a most inferior, let's say, differences of Muslim society and the Western society. So if you want to change Muslim society, the first thing that you need to change is the veiling of women. That was part of the Orientalist reading of Muslim culture, which was created by the Orientalists, but also lots of Iranian intellectuals share that assumption, because during the modernization time and still we have a tendency to read our culture from that Western attitudes. Again, the Islamic movement which happens against it, use the same thing. They didn't ask question that this symbol has never been the symbol of Islam in the Islamic culture before modernization era. Islamic society themselves, if you like, I refer you to the Women and Genders in Islam, Leila Ahmed's book, and lots of other book which was written about the Islamic society after and before modernization. Veiling has not been the issue of cultural or political identity. That veiling as the symbol of political identity of not only women, but also the culture and nation in Iranian case, was the consequence and byproduct of Orientalism. And anti-colonial Islamic resistance movement, which was a reactionary movement against that colonialism, again, did not question that assumption, did not say, okay, we want to retrieve that indigenous subject, but that indigenous subject did not take veiling as their identity. That's the imposed identity by the Orientalism. They just took that, mirrored that, echoed that, imitate that, but this time take it as a symbol of their resistance. So if we want to resist against the imperialism, against the colonialism, against the West, which was some of the assumption and request of the Islamic Revolution, the flag of our resistance, the symbol of the resistance would be bringing back the veil to the body of women. So you see that the biopolitical government of the women body shows that the dominance of that particular discourse, over that over Iranian society. So the way that they like, if the women become veiled, it shows the dominance of Islamic regime, Islamic culture over the society. If they become unveiled, it also showed and read as a movement of Iranian society to more secular regimes. So the biopolitical governance of Iranian women body represent the dominance of a particular political discourse over Iranian society. And because each time there should be some political discourse govern Iranian society, always women do not have a right to choose what they are wearing and their clothes and their method of clothing and so on and so forth. That is the history. That was the history. So in history, we see that on both unveiling and veiling was forced upon women. And that has historically been the patriarchal imposed dichotomy of women's emancipation. Veiling, unveiling, until recently, until I would say after, like in 5-6 years ago, generally research in Iran shows, my research and other research shows, they have not been considered as a symbol of ideological and religious identity and political identity for women themselves. But the veiling was read by the patriarchal society as a symbol of their political, not only their political identity, but sometimes their family's political identity. So having said that, then one may say, is the modern movement, this movement started with the protest against mandatory veiling, going to become another example of this imposed dichotomy on body and life of Iranian women? Because again, women rights question raised by the centric position of women body, not women mind, not what they think, not what they want. Of course, nowadays unveiling is one thing that Iranian women want. But again, in the same discourse that women body is the center. So, but I see also the emancipatory part, which distinguishes this movement from other movements. So this movement entails one distinguished peculiarity, and that's that beautiful Kurdish slogan, women, life, freedom, Jenjian, Azadi. So this is the first time in history of Iran that women contribute to a movement as main actor and generates not only as main actors, but also they generate its main slogan. We never had such a slogan about women, which was raised. The women women in the picture, they always have a centric, but not in the written things, not in the slogan. They didn't have a symbolic role, position. So they couldn't talk, but they should be seen in the way that the patriarchal system wants. This centric position of women in this slogan, which you see, and especially I'm concerned, and the interesting point is that concept of life. Life is irreducible to any ideology, right? Life is free. Life is unpredictable. Life is ungovernable. You cannot reproduce and you cannot reduce life to any political territory, identity, boundaries, and so on and so forth. So we see the centric position of women, but simultaneously bridging their freedom to their life and the irreducibility of life to any imposed political symbol is what I see the emancipatory potential of this movement. So freedom is not achieved as a result of being secular or being Islamic or being leftist or being whatsoever ideology. freedom is always going through the life and respecting to the life and respecting to the dignity of people, be men and women. And women actually were the high majority in the Iranian society, which always were in the center, which always they were talking about them, admired, worship. But what they lost was their dignity. As a result of all modernist movement, what they lost was I'm not saying of that in the pre-modern movement, they have a dignity, but when you put someone in the center, it is assumed that they have some sort of value and they should have some sort of at least equal right as a normal citizen. So the Women Life Freedom slogan lands on the political historical ground, which has perceived women body as a battlefield and governance of women body either as veiling or unveiling as a symbol of its political dominance over the motherland. So, but here the question is that who is going to read this movement? This is a slogan, right? This is a political slogan. Who is going? Because always there are lots of things happening, but the slogan could be seized by the dominant narrative and could be marginalized, who could be forgotten and could be misinterpreted. Who is gonna read it? And that's the point that I am trying to say I'm hopeful about, that Iranian women got or achieve or going to get, or we try to get that political consciousness in so that we Iranian women for themselves be the person who read their own slogan and interpret their own slogan. Doesn't mean that they lead the movement, because nowadays the movement is the movement about everything, right? But at the end of movement, Iranian women at least need to know Iranian women have to have the same, similar, equal human rights. And does not happen unless Iranian women start to read and interpret their slogan in their everyday life, in their political act by themselves, and question every misogynist, patriarchal reading and understanding or marginalizing of this slogan. So my question is that the final question that I'm gonna leave you with is that, is this a slogan of women are going to be in this slogan is women are going to be the one who read and leave their political action, or their political action will be read and misrepresented by another patriarchal structure with the new politics of governing women body and ignoring their human rights. I hope women would be the one who read this slogan for their own life. Thank you so much for your consideration and for your attendance. I'm open to the questions.
Thank you so much, Sara. I think that was just absolutely fascinating. I think that the question that you left us all with is something for many of us to ponder. And I think it's something that now we can contextualize that and sort of have more information on this as well. So I would ask that if anyone has questions, to please just put them in the chat. So we won't be calling on people, but I do see a raised hand there. So if you can, please just type your questions in the chat. I'm sure that that sparked many questions for many people, and I will read them to Sara as we go along. We have a little bit of time for questions, so please type those in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them there. I do see hands being raised, so again, if you could just instead put those questions into the chat, and I'm happy to ask Sara that. I guess the first question that comes to mind, Sara, and I know that you don't have a crystal ball, so you can't predict the future, but given that question that you posed to us at the end there, I'm curious, do you feel excited then by this movement and the potential, and knowing, you understand this historical context of women's roles in past movements, do you think that there's going to be real change created for women in Iran after this movement? Do you have ideas on that? And you are muted.
I knew it's gonna happen. That's happened in all of my classes, that one time at least I stay remote. So that question is a very interesting question, Ashley. But I'm hopeful. like I think we all condemn to hope. We don't have any other choice rather than be hopeful, right? And of course, I'm excited about the movement. As I see some sign, but I see some other sign as well in the movement, which make me a little bit conscious and concerned about this. The point is that what is not irreversible for me is that we now have something written about women in this movement. Of course, for me, in the short term, it might be again misrepresented, misread by that dominant political, patriarchal discourse, be Islamic or whatsoever. There is a high chance, there is a good chance that again, the system cannot change over one night, because it is not just political point. There is a cultural system. There is, and it's not just about Iran, but Iran, like all societies, like Canadian society has the patriarchal structure, and United States has a patriarchal structure. All Middle Eastern, like all majority of our global world, we know that we are living in the patriarchal structure. So this patriarchal structure, and I see some sign of it, like in the movement, I see in new slogans which comes, I see some sign of this wariness, like this concern about that new slogans, and trying to like change it or bring new, somehow sexist like slogans into the movement. I see that, but I am hopeful. And what I'm saying is that I don't think that this movement is just a women movement. I want to make my position clear. I don't think that this movement is just a women movement. This movement was triggered by unveiling of women. But women as a human has a right, right? And women have equal, at least, participation in this movement. But women have never get equal benefit from any movement in Iran. That's the only point. I don't think that the women should be leader of the movement. I don't think that we should call this movement a feminist movement. It has a feminist aspect. And beauty of the movement is that it's plurality, and of course it is threatening when it goes to the regime change, because that might be a matter of political dispute. I'm hopeful, actually, right? And I see some change as which is irreversible, right? But in long term, I am hopeful. In short term, I'm watching, I'm observing.
I think that's a great point. And I think the point that there has already now been some change that's irreversible is powerful in itself. I think that's a powerful comment to make there. You did, I just want to let everyone know there was an issue with the chat there. So you are now able to enter your questions in there. Here's a question for you, Sara. So if you want to, we'll read this one first. Oh, we're getting lots. Thanks, everyone. I'm so excited to be reading this. So I'll read you this first one, Sara, okay? So for your analysis of the current situation in the light of history, so they're saying thank you for that. And how are women conversing or dealing with diversity and divisions within the category in light of the current movement? That's a great question. Thank you so much for that.
That's a great question. That is a great question. Unfortunately, if I'm honest, to be honest, we have that problem in women movement in Iran. Women movement in Iran, I think it remained on what I can call, and maybe some of my colleagues, some of the other people of other feminists in Iran would not be agree with me, and it is totally natural, normal. But women movement in Iran is especially because of particularity of Iranian Androcentrism, which is another issue, I'm going to talk about it, but the central position of women in that system is important, which distinguish it from the Western version of it, as I know. It remained on something like on the stage of what I call first wave of feminists, similar to the first wave of feminists in Iran, in the Western, like in North American society, where there was led by the white middle class women and all differences of the women, like women of different ethnical group, religious group, was undermined, or they couldn't have a voice. They should contribute, but they couldn't have a voice. Now what we see is that lots of women from different town, society in the Iran contributing in that movement, right? But how it is translated is the translation of middle class, upper middle class, like their activity, their act, their request would be translated as a request of Iranian upper and middle class women, which their main request is unveiling. I know that women come to the streets unveiled, right? Unveiling is important, and now it becomes the political slogan. But for majority of the women who live in the urban area, are different, belong to the different ethnical group, veiling is not the main problem, right? Doesn't mean that they are happy with their veiling. And that's the result of what I had in my interview, like field interview with lots of women. And also, like last night, I had some Iranian friend talking with me, and like out of nowhere, she was like, you know, veiling is bad and we hate it, and I agree, but veiling is not our main problem. We are dealing with the lots of what you say, like all of this intersection of poverty, of class, of religious, being a religious minority, living in other geographical place, not being a Tehrani woman is in Iran is like a sign of being a little bit more oppressed, because the other cities in Iran, women do not share the same level of freedom, social freedom by their family and so on and so forth. And even in some religious community, still one of my friends who belonged to very like religious family, but she is not a religious, but the city and she knows the community. She says that some of very religious community, they are like concerned about like that, this unveiling face of the movement, which remind them of, like, for example, like unveiled act in the, but it is not, the nature is different. But I'm saying that women are struggling with different factors. Long story short, no, they didn't, like, we don't, in this feminist movement, that's the problem of feminist movement, that all people, all women do not have a voice in that movement. The voice of women is the voice of most privileged women in the Iranian society. And even, unfortunately, because of the all oppressions of the media in the Iranian society, those who represent in the Western media, the figure, the main important figure that you probably know, who represent this movement, even they request even more, like I would say, fancy than the request of the middle class Iranian women. So they just try to read the problem of Iran in the way that Western society wants to read the problem of Iranian, and liberal feminists want to read the problem of Iran. But there is no indigenous feminism in Iranian society, in which then minorities can start to grow, then like religious groups can start to grow and have a voice, then no binary women can start to have a voice. We don't have any voice of binary women, and they couldn't even show up like in the public. They can't even get out of the closet, as they call it, and be in the public. So unfortunately, at this moment, no, but I hope this, as I see it, is a turning point. It can be a thing. I can't say turning point for sure. I don't have that crystal ball, but I see some sign. I hope that that movement helped to make the question of women more diverse, to be read as more diverse. The question of Iranian women is diverse, but it should be read as it is.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And thank you so much, everyone, for these questions. They're excellent questions. A lot of people, Sarah, I just want to tell you thank you for this lecture and are really excited to have learned more from you. I think we'll do 2 more questions. We're going to end at 75 minutes. So I just want to let everyone know that. So I'm going to try to combine some questions together because they're kind of asking similar things. So bear with me, everyone, and Sarah. But there's sort of this question around, and I think from the Canadian context, a lot of people probably think of, what's going on with women's rights in the West, and thinking about in the United States, that would be one thing that comes up. So we're seeing that women's rights are under serious attack in the West and globally in many different places. And this ties to, do you think that there's going to be an impact or that these events could have more of an impact on, say, the plight of women? So this question asks in the neighboring Afghanistan or even Pakistan, or even women in the Muslim world, as Western discourses of women's rights seem to have a fairly narrow interpretation of the events in Iran. And I think tied to that as well, and this is going to become too big of a question for you, but I think obviously social media we have seen has, without a doubt, led to more awareness of this specific moment in time. But that sort of global context, how do you see that either impacting this movement in Iran, or then the impact of the movement on that global level? A large question, but any thoughts on that, Annie?
It is, but it is a great question. Of course, Iran movement has been always influential in the later movement in the area, like in the Middle East, and like this movement is the largest movement after Iranian 2009 Green movement, right? And so Iranian 2009 Green movement happened before Arab Spring, and it was the first movement in which the Facebook was used as a way, like social media was used as a way for people communicating, like making the network, coming into the street. And then we see Arab Spring come after that. So of course it's going to be influential, at least for the area. So for the world, I would say the world order does not work in that way. Normally we have import of intellectual and movement commodity from the North global, like from the what we call developed society to the what they call undeveloped society. Normally that's what was the tradition, that was what, like, the idea of democracy, the idea of the feminism, that was the tradition, right? So especially in feminist movements, which I think that we don't, and that's one of my points about the Iranian feminism, is that we don't hear that post-colonial voice in the Iranian feminism, which is very crucial in, again, creating place and room for diversity. Without having that post-colonial ground, we cannot cultivate the seeds of diversity in the feminist movement. We don't have that things. Depends on how it would be read, because that's, again, back to what I said, the previous order of the world was based on the mass media representations of the movement and revolution. Now we have social media representations of movement and revolution, which still is a representation. We should note that, because some people think that what they see in the social media is the entire reality. It is still the representations, but I would say more diverse representation, and it might create more room for the different interpretations. But I see that in the West, women are interested in it, and there are some reading of that movement as a feminist movement. How it's gonna work in the dynamic of, like, United States feminism movement is something which I cannot predict, if it's ever gonna work or have effect, or how much is effect it's gonna be, or because that needs that that context, you know, the context of feminist movement in Iran, North America, which I know as an observer, feminist observer, but I'm not actor there, and especially how it's been read. For example, what I see is that cutting of the hair is the part that Western women read a lot about that Iranian movement, which is, I don't see it in that, like in the interpretation of Iranian women about their own movement. Again, what is interesting is that Western women show the picture of Iranian women cutting their hair, putting in the social media, which again, they are the middle class women who know that performative actions and they want to show it in the social media, which is great, but not all women now do that thing, and it is a not common way of protest at this moment. They are like, they mainly unveil themselves, right? But in Western, like in the Western social media, that's the sign of the movement. That is read more frequently. And interestingly, Western women started to, for the sympathy, as I appreciate it a lot, they cut their movement. And interestingly, you see the celebrity, Iranian celebrity in the social media, they put it there as a sign of movement. So you see how we read ourselves in the way that Western feminists or Western society read us. It's interesting, and it's a topic of interpretation for itself. But because of this system, this possibility of different sort of interpretation, I can't say how it's going to affect. But I think for sure in the region, it's going to have a large effect. Global world, not without effect, of course, but how, I don't know.
Thank you for that. I love the way that you're phrasing how the movement is read and who the movement is read by. I think that's such a great way to consider its impact. Last question to summarize, and this sort of feeds off of what you just said, and I don't know if you'll have an answer for us, but I think, as you know, we're working with the Canadian Sociological Association here, just thinking about Canadians who are watching this, who might watch the recording, I think a question that comes to mind is, how can they support? And now specifically after watching your lecture, I think the question is, how do people support Iranian women specifically in sort of their movement and how we move forward in that area, if you have any ideas for that?
Well, I really appreciate the sympathy. That's the point. That's what I appreciate most, what I'm seeing here, the amount of the sympathy. And that's, I think, the most important thing that we can have. Like, that's so warming, and that's great. And support, emotional support, trying to help them, like send a good message, and like politically, I like the things that Justin Roto did about the IRCG in Iran, banning them from coming here. But I don't think that any other political intervention helped the problem. There is an inside country crisis, and it should be solved by people inside the country. I'm not a fan of those interventions at all. I'm against it, because history never shows that it has a good effect on the society. Even interpretation, I want, like, what I want is to, like, they listen. You know, if I want to say to one word, because when that happens, it is just interpretations. And like, what is being like a historical tradition of Western feminism is that they interpret the other movement without being able, like other feminist movement happening in Iran, without being able to be in that society and live in that society and see what was the culture of what's happening. What is the history of what's happening? And they read it, they have a media to represent it, they have a high voice, and they represent it. And like that sociological concept of looking glass self, we see ourselves in the glass of Western feminism, and we misinterpret our reality with that glass, and the consequences that I saw, one of the consequences, which goes for a century, veiling problem, making a veiling the central problem of women, which is not, even now is not. It is a symbol of resistance. And now, listening, like creating the discourse, creating, like, being patient to listen, and of course, sympathy. I think all human, as a human, that's what we need.
Well, on that note,
that's my idea. Maybe other women have other opinion. I don't know, but that's what I think.
I think that was excellent. So on that note, that is all the time we're going to have for today. So I would just like to finish by saying, first of all, on Sarah's last point there of listening being so essential at this time, thank you all so much for attending this, for registering and taking time out of your day to come and watch this webinar with the Canadian Sociological Association and us. We really we're so grateful for you showing up and showing your empathy towards this movement as well. Sarah, I'll just let you know that there's lots of thank yous coming through in the chat, and I think people really enjoy this, which is great. So everyone knows the recording will be posted, so you're able to watch this or share this if you would like. We would love that. And if you have any questions or anything, please reach out to the Canadian Sociological Association. If you want to contact Sarah, all of our information is on that website, or if you're interested in our Applied and Community Engaged Research Cluster, please do reach out. And with that, thank you again. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your wisdom. That was excellent and very informative. And thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.